Welcome to the Executives Lounge. This is your podcast host, Christine Fauner. We are in season 3 of the Executives Lounge, where we continue our mission to redefine leadership one amazing story at a time. This season, we're bringing together voices from all walks of life to deconstruct and reconstruct what it truly means to be a whole person as we redefine leadership in today's society. Let's get started. I start this season really intentionally with interviewing Dr. Sidney Stone Brown. Her work has been foundational in my PhD work and research in blowing Maslow's hierarchical pyramid apart and recognizing that the most important motivator, the most important need of humans is love and belonging. Dr. Sidney Stone Brown is the author of a book entitled Transformation Beyond Greed, Native Self-Actualization. And in this book, she brings Maslow's hierarchy back to the Blackfoot people that taught him some of these concepts in the first place. She interviews Blackfoot elders to bring back the ancient wisdom and the societal information and wisdom and teachings. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did.
For me, and I mentioned this in my email to you, and this is like, I feel butterflies in saying it, that I just wanted to message you and say thank you, because the work that you wrote and thinking about actualization and looking at Maslow's original works, especially his later in life stuff, I just kept coming back to this idea that, like, when I was a teacher, my master's was getting me into transformational leadership, learning about more about Maslow's, and I was like, I always felt like it was actualization is not possible in a silo. It's not possible without other people. And working with children, that's just so obvious to me, right? But your work felt like coming home. And as soon as I was able to see that it wasn't Maslow's work at all, that it was Blackfoot beliefs and systems and culture and history, it honestly felt like my thinking and my knowing came home. So
Those are important questions to be asking, and those are the very same kinds of questions that I had for myself as I worked on my doctorate, and feeling really propelled to go back to school at 55 to start working on my doctorate, because I just felt I had to get this done. I had to do this work.
I want to talk about the native self-actualization and that visual of the hands and the holes.
If you know how to make the church, which most people know how to do, put the steeple down.
Mhm.
Now you've got all your fingers, they're intertwined. And now lift one and you begin to see the hole. And lift any other, and you begin to see the holes. And when you pull them apart, that's what happened to our culture. And so the elders said our task was to fill those holes and bring people back together, because this is how we once lived. This is our way of life. And I asked, I didn't know at the time, because we're talking to the elders in Canada. This is before the DNA information came out, but we now know that our oldest DNA in the United States is actually from a member of my tribe, and it's 25,000 years. So this idea that we just got here, and that we somehow, it's okay to take whatever because it's not being used, is all the colonization and rationalization. And so for me, the work I'm doing is laying a foundation for the future so that individuals can begin to fill those holes of things that were lost. And that's what the assessment instrument is.
Mhm.
And also, it allows people to make a choice. Do they want to live predominantly in the modern world? Do they want to live predominantly in the traditional world? And to help them know that we need to have knowledge of both and live in this world as we know it. So the assessment tool is completed, and I have over 700 participants, children and adults. and middle school. Um, it's not ready to go to schools yet. And it's not ready to go to social work yet because they're still thinking in the old way. But I do think the hope of the world is indigenous knowledge worldwide. It's not just our knowledge as Blackfoot people, but also the knowledge of indigenous people around the world, to decolonize. So
Mhm.
one of the things that I got thinking about, as you sent me all your questions, water is life. It's so simple and so clear. Water is life. Now, if you think of water is life, and then I want you to add some oil, only it's going to be a small amount compared to all the other water. And then I want you to add fascism, and that's fire. And that's what we face right now in this
Yeah.
world today. And when people say, oh, you're being, hypercritical, you can't call him a fascist, he isn't a fascist, they don't understand and they don't know history.
Yeah.
So I think for some reason, as a young child, and understanding what happened to us as Native people and knowing my family's story, my auntie was one of the people that was forcibly sterilized. She went in to have her tonsils removed, and she came out of that hospital, that
Mm.
war department hospital, and she didn't have a uterus. They had totally removed her ability to have more children. And she was married and she had one child. So when people talk about the harm that was done, it was like, well, that was a long time ago. No,
No.
that was my cousin's.
There's been a rewriting of the history, right? There's the history that occurred and people experienced, and then there was the rewriting of that history from a patriarchal, colonized standpoint. There's a piece in the book, knowledge does not enrich us. It removes us more and more from the mythic world in which we were one at home. Education for me was a way out. It was a way to break a poverty cycle, like this really beautiful, sometimes very expensive ticket out. And then I realized like I could use that powerfully, right? I can articulate, I can find ways to express what I believe and what I feel. And so knowledge to me was power. But as I've headed into my fourth decade of living, um, I'm finding this return to the mythic happening, this return to spirituality, this return to the earth. Can you speak to that whole shebang I just mentioned?
I can, I can see that you are journeying where I was in my 40s. I think that along the way, there's different things that open our lives and have the, even though we're experiencing the reality that you just described, the poverty, the violence, all the hurtfulness that is a part of poverty and oppression in this country. Um, in there is integrity and dignity and a solace of kindness and generosity that is hard to explain, um, that helps us thrive, even though we shouldn't, even though we should be hopeless, but it gives us hope and it moves us out of that despair. And I remember reading Anne Frank's story, and I could relate. I absolutely could relate. And it was right at a time when Selma, Alabama was having all of the race riots, and I could relate. And I'm going, I started seeing this country as a 15-year-old, say, um, seeing it very different, even though my father was telling me our history as a family and what happened to us, what happened to our tribe. And I look back at that and I think I had all of these resources that could have been a part of my life, that would have been naturally a part of my life, taken from me. And and because they were taken, there was this deep-seated longing. I used to walk on the trails of where our cattle would walk on our ranch in Montana on my rest. And I I would wonder what it used to be like when there were buffalo there, and my dad said, "Those aren't our cow trails. Those are the trails of the indigenous animals that were always here, that were a part of our life, and so you're walking on the trails that they made." And I thought, "Holy, there's so much more to know," and that's when I really started feeling robbed, that
Mhm.
an important part of my life was being taken away from me, and that I didn't have the ability to change that, but made a determination as a small child, "This isn't fair."
I think I was gonna say, I feel like that's a moment of awakening if you live on this land. I travel all over the country. I love to take road trips and walk trails, and I think about this a lot, like what it used to be and how change is inevitable. It happens over time. People adapt and change, but the kind of change that we're talking about, the robbing, is it's more than that. It's like this traumatizing, uh, like violent ripping away of a way of life, I think.
I think my healing began as I worked with the elders because they're so kind. And they're so generous in sharing their information, and they're wanting the world to know, but not in a bitter way, not in a hurtful way, but rather tell people to see the world differently, and to think of all the knowledge of thousands of years of experience that the indigenous people all over the world, and all people were originally indigenous. That kind of wraps people's heads around what?
Mhm.
No, if you find your village, if you find your dialect, you will know where you came from. And all of our languages carried so much of the information of cultural knowledge. And when the language was taken, we lost so much.
It's I love that you brought this up because in your book, Indigenous language is alive. The words display a live process, and the definition has a spherical nature. I was really trying to wrap my head around what that means. And then the other day, I was watching this video about um, how culture and storytelling and spirituality and belief system and who you are was described in language. And to me, like the semantics of that makes a lot of sense. Like you make meanings out of words. Um, what can you describe to me what that means though? It's spherical in nature, and like how can we use language now to bring the teachings in?
It's a language that labels things. It gives, how do you say this will be a label, will be a word that describes an object. But the indigenous language described the process. And that's why it's always circular in its process, just as the seasons are circular. Um, the four directions, all of those things are circular. That a natural object in the world is circular. It's not a label. When I started picking up words of my language that was taken from me, and I would say to my dad, here's a salt shaker, how do you say salt? And Dad would say it, but he'd say it very quickly and change the subject. And I knew he knew the language. He could translate, but he wouldn't share it with us because it was so beaten into him in the boarding schools and so shaming to know the language. But it wouldn't describe the process or the experience of salt. A psychologist in Denmark wanted to translate my book to their language, which is a great honor to be asked. And I said, yes, I would work with you. And she came back to me after 6 months or so, and she said, after reading some of your book, we realized there are words that you describe in your book that we cannot describe in our Danish language.
Hmm.
So there is an indigenous knowledge that is lost when you remove yourself from the language. And just recently, science has discovered that trees talk to each other and they nurture each other and they take care of each other and their family. And I just thought of my cousin who was complaining about the road service behind his property. And he said they were tearing out trees. And he said, don't they know that they're family? Now science is beginning to understand this and appreciate it, but they've already clear cut how much.
Right.
When the elders were teaching me, they'd say, your body is a universe. If you think of your body and you think of the universe and you think of the earth, you can find elements of your body in the earth, the mountains and the valleys, and they just would be so beautiful in describing the beauty of a human body and the humanness that we have. So one of the things that you asked me about was how the heck do we change the system that we're in? The first thing I think that is going to be revolutionary is to remove the word race. Totally. All the research and the things that we're forced to quote all use the terminology of race. And yet it doesn't have any sound construct. It's made up. We're all human beings and we're all related and we're all interconnected. So when you remove the word race from the dialogue and we remove it from our senses.
In your book, you talked with an elder with the name of Clement,
Mm-hmm.
and he said to divide the people is evil.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're speaking to, I feel.
Yes.
Like any way we divide people, we categorize, we compartmentalize. Anytime we divide, we're limiting our connection.
So when people say to me as a Native person, as an American Indian, which they call us, how much Indian are you? I said, do you want the dog version or do you want the horse version? Because we're the only group of people in the United States that is forced to define ourselves by a degree of blood. And isn't that pedigree and isn't that a horse and a dog?
You also mentioned in your book doing that also created internal competition and conversation and debate and argument about who's native then within the native conversation. And that again created division internally amongst indigenous people.
And Clement was talking to me about how purposely they divided the Sissica Reserve, the Blackfoot Reserve in Canada, Episcopal and Catholic. And so then that division created people fighting over which version was correct. And we came from a culture that was over 10,000 years in the same place and had never had that kind of division.
But in the book too, you described there was this description of how medicine people viewed each other. Like if you're a medicine holder, this ancient wisdom holder, that they revered each other's expertise and never thought one was better than the other or one could do and one could not. Everybody had their expertise and were honored to share and also connect others to other expertise. There was not that competition piece or the discrediting of one to lift another. They would help people connect to that wisdom, connect to that medicine, and not say, well, I'm Episcopalian, and so this is my way, or I'm, Catholic, so this is the way. I mean, that coming back to even the ancient understanding of what an expert is.
Yeah.
It's sharing the knowledge and connecting people to the knowledge they need at the time they need it.
And not everyone has the same need.
Mm-hmm.
I think the diversity of the world is beautiful and powerful. And after I wrote the book, one of the things that I was asked to do was to go and present in Australia. I looked around the room and there were a few non-Indigenous Aboriginal people, but there were mostly Aboriginal people there. And I said, I know nothing about your people, what happened to you, what you experienced. But one thing, when I saw the movie, about two children running away from a boarding school, rabbit-proof fence. I cried through the whole thing because that was my father running away from two boarding schools in the United States. And these two women sitting on either side of me grabbed my hands and they wouldn't let go. That was the connectedness that we knew the same kind of trauma that and how that affected our families and our choices as human beings. If people had come to our country with a different frame of reference and attitude and behavior, they would have had incredible skill of learning from each other. As my elders tell me now today, take the best from both worlds, create something better. And that to me is what actualization really is about, is creating something better.
Yeah.
And finding that joy and that completeness in our lives, and that pulls us and shapes us and molds us to carry out our purpose and our mission in life.
When one person is hurting, the society is hurting. When one person is hungry, society is hungry. When one person feels loved and they share that love, we feel love. There's this concept of oneness in recognizing the individual needs and generously giving. Maslow said this in parts of his old work too, that this love and belonging is the primary motivation of human existence. And in that, if we can try to meet the needs of all of us together, that to me is like the jam. Like that's what we're all striving for. And self-actualization at the top is just makes zero sense. Like the love and belonging at the center. And then you look at, well, people need food, but they need food given with love. People need shelter, but they need that shelter built with love. Can we move into this space where we believe that everybody deserves joy, love, belonging? How do we bring this concept of love and belonging and generosity back to its original form and not call it Maslow's, not call it a hierarchy? Yes, there it is. Can you describe this to us?
Transformation is recognizing that we come from the spirit world. We are a part of the universe, and we come from the universe into this plane that we call the earth. And in Maslow's learning from the Blackfoot elders, they tried to explain this to him, that when that being comes into the earth, just like all the animals and all the plants and everything is welcomed and cared for, and you get to know each other and you get to form relationship. So you're welcoming yourself to the world, and the world is welcoming you. And then out of that comes the responsibility to protect that life, that being, from unwanted influences, to share with them a safe and stable place to be, and that they're wanted, that they're needed, and they're protected. And there's the beginning of the compassion and the wonderment of life. And then out of that comes a real sense of belonging. And that's one of the biggest holes that people have. I can't get involved in my tribe, and yet they know who their people are, they know who their ancestors are, and they're not allowed to belong. That's the hurtfulness of the system that we live in. So that sense of belonging and attachment is so important. And after the belonging is also altruism, because now it's not just I'm giving to you, but rather you're learning to give in return. And that altruism is reciprocal. If you are capable of creating more than you need, then the responsibility is to give, and to give freely without attachment or you owe or anything like that. Altruism is so beautiful in cementing that idea of belonging. and I have a responsibility. And then out of that is to live your spirit-based life and for it to be actualized. And this comes from my mentor and teacher up there. She is a licensed psychologist in Canada from the Blood Reserve, Dr. Deborah Pace. And the White Cloud University that has all of the documents for Maslow. I purposely use self-actualization in the first book because I thought then people would think about Maslow in a different way. And if we can begin to see that the actualization is for everyone, and that's what blew away Maslow, is that he found actualized people in the majority of the people he met in Sisika in 1938. And that's possible for us to get back to that place.
Yeah, he said over 86% in his original works.
Yeah.
86% of Sisika people were actualized. The average American, he was saying, was like 12%. Yeah, we can get back there. We can. I really do believe this.
It's being willing to stay true to oneself, and in that selfness, you begin to understand that you're here to help make the world a better place. And then you begin to see the cycle of life that is returning. Allow your spirit to stand up. Allow your spirit to be true to itself. Allow your spirit to join the world and be a part of this world. And you were called here for a reason. You're not here with no purpose. You're here at a dire time of change, and we need you. We need every one of you who will listen and who will help, because we won't have any more history. There will be no more stories if we are extinct. And that's what we face. So we have work to do. And I just am very honored to think that the work that I've done over the last 50 years gets passed on, and the rest is God's business. And you can refer to that as GOOD if you want, or GOD, or however.
Just thank you. It's been such a great journey for me to be exploring and remembering some of that ancient wisdom, and to be able to speak to you directly about just some of the teachings and be able to share that out, I think is so important.
Well, it's an honor to speak with you and stay in touch.
Thank you for joining us today on the Executives Lounge and the latest episode. You can find more information about Christine Fauner at christinefauner.com, and you can find more podcast episodes on Spotify, Apple, the website christinefauner.com/podcast. The Executives Lounge is more than a podcast. It's a movement towards highlighting leaders that are practicing wholeness, radical care, and love